Okay, I'm honestly really excited to film this video because, spoiler alert, I love this series. So today we're talking about Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson. I just finished a reread of this series. I, at this point, have read it 2 times, both times on audio. My first time alone, my second time with my partner, and I liked it even more on my second go-around. So I kind of just wanted to talk about the series because I really like it. So we're going to get into it. I'm going to talk about the synopsis, characters, magic system, lore, themes, which are my favorite, and this is going to be no spoilers. Now let's get into it. The synopsis of the series is essentially there is this big bad in charge, and this group of folks kind of are coming together in the underground to try to take down the Lord Ruler. It kind of goes from there. That's the synopsis of the first book. I don't really want to get into the ones of the second and third because it would be heavy spoilers for what happens in the first. Let us just say that a lot more happens than that. The first thing I want to do is talk about characters because I do feel that that is like a very strong part of this series. So I think that just as an array of characters, especially in the first one, you have this like group of people that are all like kind of different ages. You have Vin, who is younger, she's 16 when the book starts out, and then you have like Kelsier, who is the main character, who is a bit older. He's like I want to say in his like early 40s, and then you have a lot of people kind of around his age. You have Vin having love interests who are a bit closer to her age. You have Spook, who is a bit younger than her. So you have a wide character age of the cast. I found them all to be very distinct in personality. They all stood out from each other. They were all flawed in different ways, but that was kind of what made them interesting. And then I think that what the series itself does well overall is, at least for like the characters that are a bit more of the focus of the series, the main characters, they have arcs at different times in the series, so everyone's not having an arc at the same time, which I think is really beneficial. Vin, it really has a huge character change in the first book. In the second book, it's a lot about her coming into her identity. Then in the third, it's more of her being within her identity, figuring out what to do. I would say that Elend as a character has his arc in the later books. And then there is a younger character who is in the first 2 books, who is really an unknown, who then has like quite a transformation in the third book that I found still well done for the amount of time it was given. There's some characters in the series that I really love. The Khandra from book 2 onward is, I love that character. I didn't like them as much in my first read, but in my second read, I really enjoyed that character and kind of what they were doing plot-wise, moving the plot forward, but also thematically in terms of religion, which themes I will really get into. What I do also love is that we have arcs going in multiple directions, so we have people kind of finding themselves as the series goes on, and then we have some people that kind of lose themselves, and they're not happening all at the same time, and the reasons aren't all the same, and it gives you a lot of different people to latch onto. Let's get into the difficulty of the series, because I know that sometimes like it's hard to figure out like if I'm getting into fantasy, if I'm going from YA to adult, like where do I start? I think this is personally a great entry point into the fantasy genre. Everything's very spelled out for you, but not in a way that's overbearing, because the lore is very well explained, the magic system's very well explained, the characters are very dynamic. It is just a really easy series to sink into. I will say that if you're looking specifically to jump into Brandon Sanderson, I personally would recommend starting with Warbreaker instead. I haven't read most of his stuff, so like those are the only 2 Yeah, I've only read Warbreaker and Era 1 Mistborn, but of the two, I personally think starting with a standalone, or something that is a standalone currently, is a lot easier than starting with Mistborn. That is a whole series that you kind of have to invest in. However, I will say that you can, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can read the first book by itself. Now, saying that, let's get into structure, because each of the books, which I really like about this series, is contained. There is a contained plot for the first, the second, and the third. There's still a plot arch for the entire series, but there are subplots. Why am I saying arch? There's subplot, what is the word that I'm looking for? Climax? There's subplot climaxes, is that what I'm trying to say? That happened in each of the 3 books of the series. But it makes it so that, like, if you just wanted to try it out, you could read the first book of the series and still get a good ending out of it. And then choose if you wanted to find out more or stop. If you choose to stop, you still got a full novel. You do not know much about the lore and the some of the magic system of the universe. And that is another thing that I like. Like, the books itself, the plots are contained, but you kind of get expansions. So, like, kind of how I visualize it in my head is you start with the Final Empire and you know this much, right? And then you go into the Well of Ascension, and it kind of is this, like, layer around it. Now you know more about the characters, you know more about the world, you know more about the lore, you know more about the magic. And then in the third book, you kind of blow that out once again, so you're constantly, like, figuring out and learning new things about the world, and it makes it interesting. Pacing-wise, I think it helps the series as well. The first book, because he gives you more with each book, he's not giving you too much away at the beginning where you kind of get bogged down in the details, which I think happens a lot with fantasy series, where they kind of just, like, word vomit a bunch of stuff at you and you're like, where am I? What's happening? He doesn't really do that. He slowly eases you into the universe that he's created. For me, I don't really focus on pacing as much, as long as there's something interesting that we're progressing towards, which in these books, for me, there always is. Like, there's something plot-wise that they're interesting moving forward. There's something interesting thematically moving it forward. But I will say that in the third book, your characters are geographically divided, and because of that, you're getting more perspectives. So the time in the third book, while similar in length of novel, is a lot shorter in time because you're seeing so many things happening simultaneously and you're learning a little too much, in my opinion. Like, I think some of the stuff that you learn in the third book would have been better suited if it was set up a bit more in the second, because the third book itself, magic system-wise and lore-wise, you learn a ton. And it's almost hard to retain how much you're learning. It also is a lot slower. So the first few thirds of the third book are slow. I find them interesting. I like to see what's happening, but then it ends in a boom. Like, there's so much that happens at the end when everything comes together. I personally think it comes together really well. But if pacing is like a sensitivity, I would say that that's where the series suffers the most. Another place I think it suffers, which gets actually better in the second 2 books, each chapter has a writing at the end of it that comes from something. And I'm like, very vague, but I don't want to give a lot away. You learn information through these little snippets that aren't hooked into the plot line. So I personally found it annoying when in the first book, you're in the middle of a fight scene and the chapter ends, and then you get this, like, random 2-line snippet, and then you go directly back into the fight scene. I think the the first book would have been, and I think this happens in the second too, I think it would have been better if they had ended the chapters at an actual scene break and then had those things in there, because it was just a little jarring sometimes. It wasn't enough to completely like shake me out of the narrative, but it was just like kind of, I just kept thinking like, why did you guys edit it like this? Like, this makes no sense. I understand that a lot of the time you end a chapter in the middle of a scene to create tension and to make someone want to keep reading. It makes it more compulsive. But if you're giving information and you're actually breaking the pace, it's just a little weird. And let me go back to relationships a little bit, because I did talk about characters, but I think that a downfall of this series for me is the relationships in it. Not that I don't think they make sense, because I think that they do. I think that the characters make sense together, and I think it was set up well. I just really don't like how Brandon Sanderson writes romance. I really don't like that he always refers to someone as their love, and my love, and my love this, and my love that. It's like a little overdone. There were religious elements to which I like the religious themes, but there's religious elements to the relationships that felt very unnecessary. I was just like, you cannot tell me these two characters are not sleeping in the same bedroom. Like, sure, okay. Just didn't make sense. I think romance in books is like a sore spot for me, unless it's a romance. So I don't think that this would bother people the same way that it annoyed me. But I keep saying things that annoyed me because I don't think these books are perfect. However, I do want to say that I still completely love them. I find faults with them, and I can acknowledge those faults even for myself. But my feelings about the books overall, like, those faults don't really matter when it comes down to it, because all the things I love, I felt like were done so well. I kind of already touched on it a little bit, but let's just talk about the magic and the lore and the world building kind of all together. So I find the world building to be not a weak part by any means, but he doesn't, the world itself, the actual world, I felt it was very lived in. I felt that I could see the ash mounts, and I could see like the dark brown foliage and like the red sun, and like everything felt very like lived in to me. But you don't physically see a lot of the world in the books. So it's not like a big world that you're in. You're kind of in a smaller geographic space. In the third book, it does kind of open up. And yeah, in the third only, really. It opens up a little bit more, but not a ton. I don't think that's a bad thing by any means, just something I want to point out. The lore of the world, how the world came to be, how the world is the way it is now at the start of the book, the expansion of learning about the lore and the different creatures as the books go on. I loved that. I really loved how little you knew at the beginning when you felt like you knew a lot in the first book. I really loved the breakdown and you kind of finding out at the same time as the characters how much they didn't actually know and the consequences of their actions. You hear of creatures in the first book, and then you see those creatures, and then you understand those creatures and their origins. And that was really fascinating for me. And then the magic system itself. I don't really feel like I need to get into detail of what it is, because there are tons of videos out there about the magic system in Mistborn. When I read fight scenes, and this happens a lot in fantasy, I can't really in my mind understand what's happening in a fight scene. It's just like gobbledygook. Like, I'm like, okay, they're fighting, someone died, okay. With these books, because the magic system is so physics-based, I found it really easy to follow along with everything that was happening. I could envision it in my head the whole time. I felt that the magic was really conducive to visualizing the magic, if that makes sense. Not all of the magic is visualization, but how Vin uses the magic is as a Mistborn who has access to all of the metals and in that part of the magic system. I think that also how the magic system itself grows in ways that are completely unexpected, especially in the second and third, and the consequences of that, and how it still really all ties together, was very well done, and just kind of like a big joy to watch kind of open up as the series went on. What else do I want to talk about? I want to talk about the audiobook. I listened to it both times I read the series as an audiobook. I thought Michael Kramer did a really great job with them. All of the characters were very distinct. I didn't even have to be told who was talking to know who was talking because his character voices were so distinct. The writing in this book this series is very straightforward. It is there to get the points across, and I am perfectly okay with that. He's not doing anything fancy. He's not pulling out any crazy words. He is just trying to get his ideas onto the page, which I think was very successful. Okay, I just talked about a million things I already liked about this book, but let's talk about what I think is my favorite part on reread of this series, and that is the religion as a theme of the books. I just found the religious elements to be so fun to watch unveil. There's a character who is a scholar whose whole kind of life mission is to take down and remember dead religions. And then that character has a transformation at a point with what he's learning about. He goes from religions of the past to the religion of the present and to the religions of the future. And I guess I have to get into the world a little bit. So in the world, the Lord Ruler is the religious figure. And every religion, he's ruled for 1,000 years. And every religion from before is gone. No one practices anything but that religion. You watch in the series a new religion develop. And you watch people become religious figures. And this character goes from being a scholar of past religions to a learner and active part of present religion to, I can't say much, but to a questioner of religions and his fate in future ones. There's him as a character in his part of the religions. There are the actual religions happening on the page. There's the coming of a new religion. There's a new religious figure, deity, I guess, and holy peoples that you know not to be holy, but people now see as holy because of their actions on the page. And you watch that develop. You see different sects of that religion then develop around new figures. And then there's this very meta part of it, of where do all the religions originate? How do they all fit together? And what is, I guess, true religion or true power or true deity in this world? It's happening on different levels. It's happening in a very obvious way. It's happening in ways that you kind of have to pay attention to off of the page and kind of interpret. And I don't see people talk about this part of the series much, but it's my, it has to be my favorite part. It's just so fascinating. And then you have other creatures and potential religions there. I don't want to say too much, but it was just fascinating. I don't know how else to put it. I found the theme to be very provocative. It was unexpected for me in a fantasy series. I liked it even more upon reread. I was catching even more. I was able to kind of sink into that content because I wasn't learning at that point. So, and just to go on a reread, I think that there's enough like teasers kind of layered into the books that you sit there and you're like, oh, I didn't catch that before. Or, oh, that's interesting. And there's just like kind of a like things to sift through and enjoy on a reread. And I think that's all I want to talk about. I would love to know your thoughts on the series. I don't know if a lot of people that follow me have actually read these books, but if you do want me to do like a spoilery chat about these books, I definitely would. So just let me know that in the comments below, and that is all I got. So until next time, happy reading.